Chapter 1. Shadows of Yorkshire. In the year 1725, the rugged expanse of Yorkshire, England, stretched out like a timeless tapestry woven from the wild threads of nature's unyielding fury. The moors unfurled endlessly, a vast purple sea of heather swaying under skies, forever burdened with relentless sheets of rain that turned paths into quagmires and chilled the marrow of any soul foolish enough to linger outdoors after dusk. Mist clung tenaciously to the shadowed valleys, wrapping them in a ghostly shroud that blurred the line between earth and ether, as if the land itself conspired to hide its deepest secrets from prying eyes. Here, amid this desolate beauty, shepherds, hardy folk with wind-burnt faces and calloused hands, tended their scattered flocks of sheep, enduring the biting winds and the isolation that bred stories as enduring as the peat bogs themselves. Around crackling peat fires in humble stone cottages, these shepherds traded whispers of the uncanny, tales that had passed from generation to generation like heirlooms of fear. They spoke of ghostly figures said to haunt the ancient woods lining the banks of the River Derwent, spectral shapes that darted through the twisted branches of gnarled oaks on nights when the wind howled with the ferocity of long-extinct wolves. These were no mere drunken fancies spun from too much ale. They were sightings etched deeply into the local lore, corroborated by sober men who swore on their Bibles that they had glimpsed pale forms flitting just beyond the reach of lantern light. The apparitions were rumoured to survive on stolen sheep entrails, ripped fresh from carcasses under cover of darkness, and wild roots clawed from the unforgiving soil by hands that bore the mark of something not quite human. The air on those nights carried an unnatural chill, laced with the faint metallic tang of blood and the earthy musk of decay, sending even the bravest hunters back to their hearths with tales that grew taller with each retelling. The origins of these legends trace back to the enclosures of the 1690s, a time when greedy landlords, driven by ambition and the promise of profit, had fenced off the common lands that once sustained the poor crofters and their families. This ruthless land grab had starved entire communities, leaving orphans to wander the moors in search of scraps, their cries swallowed by the wind. Widows, huddled in doorways with shawls drawn tight against the cold, swore fervently that the spirits were the ghosts of those abandoned children, twisted by years of isolation and hunger into feral entities that prowled the night. Hunters, armed with flintlock muskets and packs of baying hounds, had ventured into the woods time and again, only to return pale-faced and trembling, their dogs cowering at the tree line, tails tucked between their legs, refusing to give chase no matter how fiercely whipped. "The devil's own get," the men would mutter under their breath, bolting heavy oak doors and murmuring prayers as twilight bled into night, their eyes darting to every rustle outside. Thomas Hargrove, the estate's grizzled gamekeeper, was a man of 45 winters, his face a weathered map of scars earned from brutal brawls with poachers who dared encroach on Lord Edmund Fairfax's vast holdings. Broad-shouldered and taciturn, with a beard streaked by early grey and hands rough as bark from years of wielding knife and snare, Hargrove had long dismissed the villagers' superstitious yarns as the prattle of idle minds. He prided himself on his practicality, a trait honed by solitary patrols across the moors, where survival depended on keen senses and unyielding resolve. Yet even he could not ignore the mounting reports of mangled livestock, ewe throats torn out, lambs vanished without trace, that had plagued the estate for months, threatening Lord Fairfax's coffers and his reputation as a steward of the land. It was on that fog-shrouded autumn dawn, when the world lay hushed under a blanket of pearl-grey mist that muffled sound and distorted shapes, that Hargrove's scepticism shattered like fragile glass. Setting out from the gamekeeper's lodge before first light, his 3 lurchers, lean, wiry dogs bred for the hunt, padding silently at his heels, he followed a fresh trail of carnage, a string of gutted rabbits, their fur matted with dew and entrails strewn like grisly breadcrumbs leading toward a steep ravine. The River Derwent murmured softly below, its waters gliding over slick, moss-covered stones that gleamed faintly in the half-light. The air grew thick with the scent of wet earth, mingled with something sharper and more primal. a musky reek of animal sweat laced with the acrid edge of unbridled fear that set Hargrove's nostrils flaring and his pulse quickening. His dogs froze abruptly at the ravine's edge, hackles rising like quills on a porcupine, low growls rumbling from their throats as they stared fixedly into the hollow of a massive yew tree. The ancient sentinel of the woods bore bark scarred by lightning's jagged fury and what appeared to be frantic, claw-like scratches etched deep into the wood, as if some desperate creature had clawed for purchase in vain. Hargrove's hand tightened on his musket, his breath coming in shallow bursts as he crept forward, peering into the shadowed moor of the tree's cavernous trunk. There, huddled like cornered beasts in a nest of leaves and bracken, were two children, no older than 8 summers, twins by the mirror of their frail forms. A boy and a girl, their skin was ghostly pale beneath layers of caked mud that flaked off in gritty clumps, revealing glimpses of vulnerability beneath the grime. Their bodies were wiry and sinewy, marked by a constellation of scars from brambles that tore like barbed wire and falls from rocky outcrops during desperate flights. Matted hair, tangled with twigs and burrs, framed faces dominated by wide, unblinking eyes that were unmistakably human, yet dilated with the raw panic of cornered prey, pupils swallowing the irises in terror. Their nails had curved into blackened talons, toughened and elongated from years of digging tubers from frozen ground, or slashing at foes in the wild. They wore only rags fashioned from scavenged hides and coarse sacking, their limbs taut with the lean, predatory strength of survivors who had long outpaced their human frailty. Scattered around their makeshift lair were the stark testimonies of their existence. Bones picked meticulously clean, rabbit femurs snapped for marrow, fox ribs gnawed to splinters, even the cracked skull of a badger, its eye sockets staring blankly upward. Hargrove's heart hammered against his ribs like a forge hammer, a cold sweat beading on his brow despite the chill. These were no fey changelings from the parish tales spun to frighten children. Up close, their humanity pierced through the layers of savagery like a faint light through storm clouds. The boy, whom locals would later dub Peter, met Hargrove's gaze first, not with the mindless rage of a beast, but with a flicker of desperate cunning, his thin arms outstretched protectively in front of his sister, muscles quivering with readiness to fight or flee. She, rumoured thereafter as Mary, clung to him with the tenacity of a burr, her small frame trembling uncontrollably, emitting a soft, keening whimper that clawed at Hargrove's gut like a rusty blade. It was the heartbreaking sound of a lost child, not some monstrous abomination, muffled by years of enforced silence and the harsh tutelage of the wild. Hargrove approached with the caution he reserved for a spooked foal, hands raised, palms out in a universal gesture of peace, his voice dropping to a low, soothing murmur. "Easy now, little ones. No harm meant by old Tom. You're safe with me." The lurchers growled low in their throats, straining at their leashes, but held their ground at his sharp whistle. Peter snarled in response, baring teeth filed to jagged points by constant gnawing on bone and root, lunging forward just short of Hargrove's booted leg, a fierce warning shot, not a full assault. Mary echoed her brother's defiance with a guttural howl, raw and piercing, that reverberated through the ravine and sent an involuntary shiver racing up Hargrove's spine. It wasn't mere animal noise. Beneath the primal edge lurked the distorted cadence of forgotten words, twisted by isolation into something alien yet achingly familiar. Overwhelmed, Hargrove backed away slowly, fumbling for his powder horn and firing a sharp flash from his musket into the air, a thunderous crack meant to scatter them. But the twins merely recoiled deeper into the ew's embrace, their eyes locking onto his with a heartbreaking blend of defiance and dawning betrayal, unyielding even in fear. He bolted for the village of Whitby Edge as if the devil himself nipped at his heels, mind reeling with the impossibility of what he had witnessed. These children evoked a profound pity amid the terror they inspired, their wildness not innate malice, but a hard-won badge of unimaginable suffering. Had they been orphaned in the smallpox epidemics that had swept the moors a decade prior, leaving pyres of bodies in their wake? or cast out by superstitious kin who saw ill omens in their birth. By noon, the close-knit hamlet buzzed with frenzy, alehouses overflowing with farmers and fishermen crowding around Hargrove as he recounted his tale in hoarse bursts. The blacksmith pounded his anvil with unusual vigour, claiming the twins had suckled at the teats of wolf pups under moonlit skies. The midwife, drawing on her herbal lore, insisted they were Romani brats bewitched by gypsy curses to evade the enclosure's famine. Mothers herded their young indoors, barring windows against the wild curse that might leap from shadow to shadow, while fathers clutched pitchforks and discussed forming posses. Lord Fairfax, the rationalist master of the estate, whose shelves groaned under pamphlets from the Royal Society, extolling Locke and the triumphs of empiricism, smelled not just scandal, but scientific opportunity in the air. Proof positive of nature versus nurture, he declared to his steward over brandy in the manor's oak-panelled study, eyes alight with fervour. Fetch scholars from York at once, but first we capture them unharmed. Their minds must be studied, dissected layer by layer to illuminate the human soul. At dusk, as the sickle moon hung low like a scythe ready to harvest secrets, a posse assembled under Fairfax's command. Riders on sturdy mounts, armed with nets borrowed from fox hunts, lanterns flickering like malevolent eyes, and mastiffs muzzled to prevent an outright slaughter that might ruin the specimens. They baited snares with chunks of raw mutton near the yew tree, the metallic scent of blood wafting on the breeze, and waited in the oppressive gloom, breaths held against the chorus of crickets and distant owl hoots. Hunger, that relentless tyrant, drew the twins out under the moon's pale gaze. Peter snatched the meat first, tearing into it with ravening fury, juices dribbling down his chin as Mary scanned the encroaching shadows, her nostrils flaring wide to taste the air for danger. The trap snapped shut with a vicious crack, ropes snaring Peter's legs in an instant, yanking him airborne as he thrashed like a speared fish. His scream rent the night, a raw child's terror fused with beastly fury, biting deep into a handler's hand, crunching bone and drawing a spray of arterial blood. Mary exploded into frenzied action, her claws raking across a horse's flank, sending the beast into a rearing frenzy that toppled its rider into the mud. Chaos erupted in full. Shattered lanterns sparked against dry moss, igniting brief flares. Dogs snapped free of muzzles, snapping wildly. Nets tangled in the melee, ensnaring men as often as prey. Yet amid the bedlam, Hargrove glimpsed the core of their resistance. Not savagery for its own sake, but survival's desperate instinct etched into every sinew. Peter, even bound and dangling, twisted to shield Mary with his body. She whimpered pleadingly as a cudgel glanced off her temple, stunning her into limp submission. Subdued at last, after what seemed an eternity of snarls and blows, the twins were lashed securely to makeshift litters of branch and canvas, trails of their blood marking a sombre path back through the moors to Fairfax Hall. Villagers lined the rutted road, a mix of jeering rabble hurling stones and epithets, devil spawn, and silent weepers who left bowls of fresh milk in futile gestures of mercy, hoping to appease whatever wild spirit animated the children. As the heavy oak doors of Fairfax Hall slammed shut, with a finality like a tomb ceiling, Peter's howl pierced the night once more. Mournful, profoundly human, an anguished cry for kin, forever lost to the moor's embrace. What unimaginable tragedies had forged these broken souls from innocence to ferocity? Could the Enlightenment's probing light redeem them, drawing forth the civilized beings buried beneath the grime? Or would it shatter what fragile remnants of self remained? The shadows of Yorkshire had at last surrendered their most guarded secret, but the true horror, the experiment's uncharted depths, lay waiting in the manor's bowels, pulsing with inevitable tragedy. Chapter 2. The secret asylum Fairfax Hall stood as a brooding sentinel against the relentless gales that swept across the Yorkshire moors in late autumn of 1725, its weathered turrets thrusting upward like accusatory fingers piercing the low, scudding clouds that seemed perpetually on the verge of unleashing another torrent. Constructed in the Elizabethan era from stout Yorkshire stone, the manor had weathered centuries of border skirmishes, Puritan crackdowns, and the slow grind of rural decay, its facade scarred by ivy and lichen that clung like desperate fingers to the mortar. Yet beneath this veneer of aristocratic grandeur lay a forgotten underbelly, a labyrinthine network of cellars hewn in medieval times from the living rock, originally brimming with wool bales smuggled during Cromwell's Puritan interregnum to evade taxes and troop inspections. Now, under Lord Edmund Fairfax's ambitious directive, these damp vaults had been hastily repurposed into what he grandly termed the Asylum of Enlightenment, a clandestine laboratory where the era's rationalist fervour would clash headlong with the primal unknown. Fairfax, a man in his early 50s with a powdered wig, framing a face etched by intellectual labours and the faint pockmarks of a survived smallpox bout, had long devoured pamphlets from the Royal Society, treatises by Locke on the tabula rasa mind, empirical essays extolling observation over superstition. His library upstairs overflowed with leather-bound volumes, their spines cracked from fervent handling, and now he directed the frantic refitting of the cellars with the zeal of a general marshalling troops. Iron-barred cells, dank relics salvaged from long-abandoned debtor prisons in York, were hastily lime-washed to a sickly white, their walls still weeping seepage from underground springs that turned the flagstone floors perpetually slick and treacherous. Straw pallets, infested with fleas despite hasty fumigation, were strewn across the cold stone. Chains, heavy as anchor ropes, and looped through massive eye bolts embedded in walls thick as a man's thigh, dangled ominously from ceilings vaulted like cathedral crypts. Fairfax insisted these were mere therapeutic restraints to prevent self-harm or flight, scribbling feverish justifications in his journal for dispatch to London correspondents. The noble savage yields to reason's gentle hand, proving nurture's supremacy over nature's brutish forge. The twins arrived under the cover of a moonless midnight, their capture-forged litters borne on the straining shoulders of Thomas Hargrove and two burly footmen down a spiralling stone stairwell that twisted like a serpent's coil into the earth's bowels. Torchlight flickered erratically, casting elongated shadows that danced like spectres across the rough-hewn walls, illuminating the procession's grim cargo. Peter's wiry frame still taut with barely contained defiance, his scarred limbs twitching against the ropes. Mary's slight body limp from sheer exhaustion, her pale face slack, but for the occasional flutter of eyelids, both siblings streaked with the drying blood of their desperate fray in the woods. The air thickened progressively into a cloying miasma as they descended, mildew from centuries of damp, the acrid bite of fresh lime-wash stinging the eyes, and the primal undercurrent of fear sweat that emanated from the twins like a palpable aura, mingling with the metallic tang of their wounds. Waiting in the wavering torch glare at the cellar's heart was the assembled cadre of experimenters, each a distinct archetype of the age's clashing philosophies. Dr. Elias Thorne, a skeletal anatomist hailing from York, loomed with ink-stained fingers, clutching a leather-bound ledger crammed with phrenological sketches, bump maps of the skull correlating intellect to cranial contours, theories cribbed from Viennese quacks. Reverend Josiah Hale, a red-faced cleric whose jowls quivered with pious indignation, gripped a dog-eared Bible translated into Gothic script, convinced that Satan himself lurked in the feral hearts before them, awaiting exorcism's blade. Lady Margaret Fairfax, Edmund's widowed sister in her late 40s, stood slightly apart, her herbal satchel bulging with bundles of dried valerian root, chamomile flowers, and laudanum tinctures. Her eyes, softened by the grief of her own 3 children, lost to the 1711 fever epidemic, held a maternal flicker amid the clinical chill. Unbinding commenced with a detachment that bordered on the mechanical, the air humming with tension. Mary was attended first, her ragged hides and sacking stripped away by 2 gloved maids who averted their eyes from the girl's vulnerability, revealing a body etched like a battlefield map of survival. Jagged thorn scars crisscrossing her narrow ribs in angry red lattices, bite marks from skirmishes with foxes puckering her shoulders like mottled constellations. Old bruises faded to sickly yellow, reminiscent of moorland lichens after a harsh frost. A copper tub, positioned over a brazier and steaming with water infused by Margaret's herbs, lavender to soothe, rosemary for clarity, awaited. Immersion ignited pandemonium. Mary thrashed like a speared eel, her blackened nails carving crimson furrows down a servant's forearm, drawing yelps and curses. Her keening wail echoed off the vaulted ceilings like a banshee's dirge, a sound that blended raw animal terror with the buried lament of a child ripped from her world. Peter, manacled afresh to his cell's bars, strained against the iron with desperate fury, his growl a sustained, bone-rattling vibration that set the chains to clanking in sympathy, his wide eyes locked unblinkingly on his sister's torment in raw, animal anguish that twisted the faces even of the hardened footmen. "Brute mercy for brute souls," Thorne muttered through gritted teeth, his bony fingers probing her freshly scrubbed scalp for cranial irregularities, ridges deemed propensities for cunning, hollows indicative of imbecility. Lady Margaret cooed forgotten nursery rhymes. "Hush-a-bye, baby on the treetop," her voice a fragile bridge across the abyss, steady despite the chaos, as she stroked damp hair from Mary's forehead. Beneath the encrusted filth emerged poignant reminders of their stolen infancy. Faint freckles dusting Mary's button nose like stars scattered across a winter sky. A strawberry birthmark on Peter's collarbone mirroring hers exactly. A twin's secret sigil, proof of shared womb and unbreakable bond. Broth followed the ablutions, thick barley porridge laced with tender mutton scraps from the manor's kitchens, spooned with deliberate care by Margaret's steady hand into mouths unaccustomed to such gentleness. Peter spat the first offering in defiance, grey sludge dribbling down his stubbled chin to splatter on the straw. But primal hunger, that great leveller, prevailed. He lapped from the wooden bowl like a whelp at its dam's teat, broth flecking his nascent beard and matting fresh strands of hair. Mary mimicked hesitantly at first, tentative sips yielding to ravenous gulps, her free hand, chained at the wrist, stretching desperately through the bars dividing their cells to clutch at Peter's fingers, knuckles whitening in silent communion. A rigid regime crystallized over the ensuing fortnight, blending flickers of compassion with the cold scalpel of science, dawn's bleak light filtering dimly through grated vents heralding the onslaught. Language assaults commenced with flashcards etched by Thorne's own hand, crude woodcuts of a thatched house belching smoke, a roaring hearth fire, a crusty loaf of bread, a stern patriarchal god enthroned on clouds, held aloft by his bony fingers like talismans of transformation. Peter proved the quickest study, his guttural utterances evolving by degrees. "Fa-ya!" barked triumphantly as hearth flames leaped and crackled, warming his manacled hands outstretched toward the blaze. "Ba-red!" mangled but proud as he gnawed into the crust core deep, crumbs cascading like a victorious rain. Mary lagged behind, her voice emerging as a fragile rasp rusted by years of disuse. Yet she aped her brother's breakthroughs with dogged persistence, clutching the flashcards to her chest like sacred relics against the encroaching dark. Afternoons pivoted to drills in civility, pewter spoons baffling their instincts at first, rejected for eager fingers scooping stew or teeth crunching carrots whole, orange juice staining chins and dribbling onto palates in messy arcs. Peter mastered a rudimentary grip by the week's end, spearing elusive peas with awkward but growing precision, a faint spark of pride lighting his eyes. Mary rocked a wooden doll pilfered from the nursery upstairs, humming Margaret's lullabies in fractured mimicry. "Hush, baby." Tree, her small fingers stroking the yarn hair with a tenderness that pierced even Hale's ironclad zealotry, drawing reluctant nods from the Reverend. Progress chained inexorably into evenings of deeper, more invasive probes. Peter gripped a goose quill with ink-knotted fingers, scrawling erratic lines across fresh vellum, jagged letters forming PET. Thorne whooping as if he had decoded the Rosetta Stone itself, ink blots celebrating like spilled wine. Mary traced abstract shapes in pools of spilled gruel on her palette, circles blooming into rudimentary faces with dot eyes and slash mouths, her free hand signing urgent nonsense to Peter through the bars. Rapid clicks evoking the soughing of moor wind through heather, pitched grunts signalling covert plots unseen by their captors, their private tongue, undeciphered and fiercely unbroken, a final bastion of self. Fairfax pored over his journals nightly by candlelight in his study above, dispatch riders galloping south through the mud with sealed missives. Week 3. Subject A masters rudimentary phonemes. Subject B exhibits nascent maternal instinct. Nurture triumphs over Rousseau's wild fancies, illuminating the blank slate of the soul. Yet the veneer of Enlightenment victory cracked inexorably under the assault of night's uncharted hours, when the moor's silence amplified the cellar's horrors. Nightmares ravaged the twins hourly, Peter's convulsions rattling his chains like Jacob Marley's ghost, unleashing moor-song howls that pierced the stone and summoned the baying of hounds from distant kennels, rousing villagers to pound fists on the manor gates in terror-stricken fury. Mary curled into a fetal ball on her pallet, rocking ceaselessly with subterranean keens that seeped upward through mortar cracks, drawing Lady Margaret to pace the echoing corridors till the ashen light of dawn, her slippers slapping flagstones slick with condensation. Mysterious hoards surfaced in dawn inspections, gnawed bones of smuggled rats stashed beneath straw pallets like buried treasure, feathers plucked methodically from goose-down pillows and woven into intricate nests mimicking yew-tree hollows. Rages erupted without warning, primal reflexes shattering the fragile progress. Peter, denied his craved raw venison in favour of civilized fare of boiled puddings, hurled a chamber pot with chain-limited force, shattering it against the iron bars in a spray of porcelain shards that sliced his thigh open. Blood welled crimson as he licked the wound clean with methodical swipes, eyes regressing to feral slits. Separation for Thorne's meticulous caliper measurements, probing skull sutures for degenerative signs, triggered Mary's full frenzy. Unbound briefly for weighing, she gouged her own forearms with renewed vigour, fresh welts rising like vengeful bramble ghosts, shrieking, "Bruth! Bruth!" in a voice raw as flayed hide until reunited, collapsing into his outstretched arms through the bars. Servants' murmurs swelled into outright mutiny, whispers snaking through kitchens and sculleries like smoke. "They speak devil tongues at witching hour," the scullery maid hissed to her fellows, swearing that bolts drew themselves undrawn by morn, shadows twisting in impossible angles. Hargrove drowned his mounting doubts in tankards of Whitby Edge ale at the village tavern, haunted by Peter's unyielding gaze. "The lad's not learning our ways. We're losing ours to this god-forsaken pit." Hale doubled his vespers, splashing holy water that elicited hisses and blistering welts on pale skin. Thorne proposed purgative bloodletting to purge the wild humours from tainted blood, lancets glinting ominously. Fairfax himself wavered in the candlelit watches, Enlightenment zeal clashing with a creeping dread that gnawed at his rationalist core. What if nurture unearthed not the blank slate of Locke, but a monster's snarling maw? One thunder-lashed evening, as jagged lightning clawed the roiling sky, and rain lashed the cellar's grates like divine retribution's whip, Mary shattered the impasse with crystalline clarity. Reaching her porcelain-pale fingers through the unyielding bars to clasp Peter's straining grasp, knuckles bruised and raw, she rasped words clear as cracked cathedral bells. "Brutha!" Thorne's quill snapped in his fist, ink pooling black as congealing blood on his ledger. Hale crossed himself with trembling fingers, murmuring imprecations. Margaret wept silently, tears carving tracks through the cellar grime on her cheeks. Triumph, or harbinger of doom. The asylum's fragile edifice trembled on its foundations. Deeper cures loomed on the horizon. Thorne's sharpened lancets thirsty for veins, Hale's ritual incantations escalating to exorcism's fire, Fairfax's insatiable probes delving into psyche's shadowed recesses. Could the moor's ancient shadows truly be forged into icons of Enlightenment progress, or would their primal pulse, reawakened and ravenous, devour the experimenters whole, stone by civilized stone? The wild heart of the twins beat louder now, unchecked and unbowed, echoing through Fairfax Hall like the tolling of a funeral knell. Chapter 3. Experiments on the Soul. Fairfax Hall's cellars, transformed into the asylum of enlightenment, lay shrouded in the suffocating hush of winter, 1725–26, as snow sealed the Yorkshire moors in an icy tomb of silence that pressed down upon the manor like the weight of divine judgment. Flurries whipped against the narrow grated vents high in the vaulted ceilings, their faint howls infiltrating the stone to mingle with the ceaseless drip of condensation from lime-washed walls, turning the air into a perpetual fog of chill dampness that seeped into bones and dulled the senses. Lord Edmund Fairfax's initial optimism, once as buoyant as a Royal Society balloon ascent, had curdled into a dark obsession, fueled by effusive letters from London luminaries who hailed his noble savage thesis as a landmark in the empiricist crusade. Mere words are insufficient scaffolding for true transformation, declared Dr. Elias Thorne, with the fervour of a surgeon unveiling his instruments, unpacking from his black physician's satchel an array of gleaming lancets honed to razor edges, brass calipers etched with measurement gradations, and vials of mercury salts shimmering like liquid sin, tools meant to excise the beast not just from mind, but from flesh and spirit alike. Reverend Josiah Hale nodded grimly in concurrence, his exorcism rituals, once fringe zealotry, now sanctioned under the guise of moral purges to scour the twin souls of infernal taint. Lady Margaret Fairfax, her herbal remedies a lone voice of mercy amid the encroaching brutality, protested softly in the shadows, her satchel of soothing balms feeling ever more futile against the men's sharpened steel. Peter and Mary, once feral sparks glimpsed in the yew tree's hollow, now flickered as tamed flames in their iron-barred cells, yet at a terrible mounting cost that etched new lines of anguish into their fragile forms. Peter's speech had bloomed unevenly under the relentless drills, emerging in halting bursts that carried the raw edge of his moorland origins. "Fire good," he would rasp triumphantly, extending his manacled hands toward the hearth's crackling blaze, fingers splaying to drink in the warmth like a parched wanderer at an oasis. "Brutha hungy," he pointed insistently through the bars to Mary, his voice cracking with fraternal urgency as her gaunt cheeks hollowed further. She mirrored his progress haltingly, clutching her wooden doll like a talismanic shield against the void, whispering, "Margaret, milk," in tones so cracked and fragile they brought involuntary tears to the lady's eyes, evoking ghosts of her own lost brood. But advancement stalled stubbornly at these rudimentary basics. Abstract concepts like sin, sovereign king, or heavenly reward elicited only blank stares from their wide eyes, or guttural refusals growled low in defiance, Peter's lips curling back to bare-filed teeth, Mary's head shaking with instinctive recoil. Their secret tongue persisted defiantly in stolen whispers during the dim hours, rapid clicks mimicking the soughing moor wind through heather, low-pitched grunts signalling unspoken plots and shared memories that eluded their captor's grasp. Servants, eavesdropping from the stairwell, bolted the cellar doors tighter each night, their whispers evolving into tales of midnight scratches, etching eldritch patterns into the flagstones, symbols half human, half beast. Thorne's cures commenced with the merciless precision of dawn's bleak light, slanting through the grates, illuminating the grim theatre of transformation. Phrenology initiated the onslaught, the twins' heads shaved to ragged stubble by trembling maids, exposing scalps pale as uncooked dough. Thorne's cold brass compasses mapped their craniums with clinical detachment, tracing ridges and hollows like a cartographer charting forbidden territories. Peter's skull revealed propensities for ferocity, oversized bumps above the eyes deemed harbingers of primal rage. Mary's displayed imbecilic hollows in the frontal regions, auguring feeble intellect, a pseudoscience verdict that elicited Thorne's satisfied nods and Fairfax's scribbled annotations. Caliper pinches followed, the instrument's jaws clamping tender flesh to measure cranial breadth, drawing sharp yelps from Peter, who bit savagely at the invading metal, spitting bent shards onto the straw amid guttural curses, and plaintive sobs from Mary, who curled into a quivering ball, whimpering, "No touch, no hurt," in her fractured English, her small body racked with shudders. Bloodletting escalated the torment, lancets slicing precise incisions into the crook of elbows, where veins pulsed blue beneath translucent skin, dark venous blood dripping steadily into shallow porcelain basins to balance the feral humours and purge the wild taint from their corrupted vitae. Peter thrashed against his restraints with the fury of a storm-lashed oak, his howls profane hybrids of English oaths gleaned from servants and primordial moor screams, his wiry frame collapsing pallid and sweat-sheened post-leeching, breath rasping like wind through a broken reed. Mary fared far worse, her slight veins rebelling against the assault. Fever spiked mercilessly in her weakened body, birthing vivid deliriums where she clawed at phantom wolves circling her palate, murmuring of endless chases across heather-choked expanses. Margaret dosed laudanum tinctures in secret during these crises, slipping vials past Thorne's watchful gaze, but he caught her once mid-act. "Sympathy only coddles savagery, madam. True science demands rigour, not maternal weakness." Hale's spiritual assaults intensified in parallel, transforming the cellars into a battleground of faith versus flesh. Splashes of holy water from silver aspergillums elicited explosive hisses from the twins, welts rising red and angry on their pale skin like brands of rejection. Peter lapped the sanctified liquid defiantly from the flagstones, his tongue curling in mockery, while Mary shrieked, "Devil water, burn!" in a burst of newfound clarity that chilled the reverend to his core. Rosary beads forced into their chained palms drew bitten fingers and flung prayers. Hale chanted psalms until his voice grew hoarse, binding heavy crucifixes to their brows with supple leather straps that chafed raw sores. One endless midnight vigil, as candles guttered low and shadows pooled like ink, Peter seized violently, eyes rolling back to whites, sinewy body arching bow taut against the chains, foam flecking his lips in what Hale proclaimed triumphantly a demonic fit, proof of infernal possession. The boy clawed at the air with talon-nailed fingers, rasping in tongues that blended half-English pleas. "Mama cold! Meat gone!" with half-more howls that reverberated through the vaults. Mary echoed across the dividing bars, their cries harmonizing into a dirge so unearthly it shook fine dust from the rafters, rattling lanterns and drawing Fairfax from his slumbers above to witness entranced, quill flying across parchment. Convulsions evince the internal war, civilization's light versus chaos's encroaching night. Physical torments layered relentlessly atop the mental and spiritual barrages, each designed to reshape body and instinct into civilized molds. Upright cages of wrought iron, suspended from ceiling beams by pulley ropes, hoisted them for posture correction. Hours dangling with toes brushing the straw-strewn floor, muscles screaming in protest as spines straightened forcibly against nature's crook. Peter endured with stoic defiance, his glare daggers aimed at Thorne's back, jaw clenched like a vice. Mary whimpered ceaselessly, her bladder's shameful yielding staining the palate below, tears carving clean tracks through grime on her cheeks. Food devolved into punitive mush, stale bread soaked in bitter vinegar to induce docility, denying the raw pleasures of flesh and blood that fueled their wild cravings, leaving them hollow-eyed and listless by midday. Peter's rages reignited like peat fires long smouldering beneath ash. Denied a haunch of raw venison begged for with pleading eyes, he lashed his chains against the unyielding bars until knuckles pulped to bloody ruin, roaring, "Meat! Run free!" in a voice that echoed like thunder trapped underground. Mary regressed into self-harm anew, her nails reopening forearm welts into festering lattices veined with yellow pus, whispering more songs to her doll as infection took hold. Hoarded vermin multiplied unchecked in the shadows. One dawn patrol, Thorne unearthed a nest of pink rat newborns suckled greedily at Mary's breast, her eyes vacant as a she-wolf's in the den, milkless teats chafed raw. "Regression absolute," he bellowed, smashing the litter underheel in a spray of gore. triggering her first full, coherent sentence hurled like a spear. "You kill babies! Evil men!" Fractures spiderwebbed through the experimenter's fragile alliance, the cellar's oppressive confines amplifying every discord. Hargrove, the gamekeeper whose conscience had haunted him since the capture, deserted his post after witnessing one particularly brutal cure, muttering of cursed halls and blood-soaked stones as he vanished into the snow-veiled moors. Maids fled in pairs under moonless skies, claiming apparitions in the torchlight, twins' shadows stretching unnaturally long across walls, merging into single feral silhouettes that whispered invitations to freedom. Lady Margaret barricaded herself in her chambers upstairs, tormented by Mary's fever-dream pleas filtering through the stone. Forest. Home sweet. Cold stone kills slow. Fairfax isolated himself in his study, pacing furrows into Persian rugs while poring over empirical charts graphing humanity quotients. Peter teetering at 42%, Mary plummeting to 37% amid the relapses, his rationalist fervour warring with visceral dread. Thorne proposed trepanning as the ultimate recourse. Drill through the skull cap, release entrapped wild vapours like ancient trepanations, while Hale advocated drowning in baptismal immersion till confession rung forth, holy water turning to judgment's flood. Fairfax wavered visibly, visions of Royal Society glory clashing with the cellar's escalating stench of despair, urine, and unwashed fear. Winter solstice eve plunged the asylum into the abyss, thunder rattling the grates overhead, as if the heavens themselves recoiled from the proceedings below. Thorne leeched Peter excessively, 30 engorged worms draining him to a ghost-white pallor, blood pooling black in basins till the boy's pulse fluttered like a moth's wing. Revived briefly by smelling salts acrid as hartshorn, Peter gripped the bars with trembling fingers, locking his fever-bright eyes with Mary's across the void. Sis. Free now. She nodded weakly, their private clicks accelerating into a frantic morse of rebellion, a silent pact forged in shared torment. Hours later, screams erupted not from Peter, but Mary. Her cell flooded with crimson horror, wrists slashed methodically with a smuggled porcelain shard pilfered from a shattered pot, blood painting the walls in primal streaks, desperate handprints splaying like pleas, claw marks raking stone, a crude home scrawled in looping drips above her palate. Servants swarmed the chaos like panicked ants. Margaret stanched the wounds with wadded rags and herbal poultices, her hands slick with gore, but infection had rooted deep from prior self-inflicted cuts, gangrene's black tendrils already snaking beneath skin. Peter wailed inconsolably, battering the dividing bars till his shoulder wrenched from its socket with a sickening pop, dangling limp as he sagged against chains. Fairfax stared transfixed at the carnage, his face ashen as fresh-fallen snow, whispering hoarsely, "What have we wrought in reason's name?" Thorne bandaged frantically with trembling hands, lancets forgotten. Hale prayed futilely over the bloodied scene, crucifix shaking. The twins teetered on oblivion's brink, bodies broken beyond mending, souls fracturing into shards no science could reassemble. Enlightenment's probing blade had cut far too deep. Wildness wasn't merely erased, but inflamed into vengeful fire. As Mary's fever raged unchecked, her lips murmuring fragmented moor songs of wind and wolfkin, whispers seeped beyond the cellar's stone, villagers massing at the gates with torches, demanding the demons consigned to purifying flames. Scandal brewed like a storm on the horizon, the experiment's noble facade crumbling to expose the raw horror beneath. Had science truly tamed the moor's shadows, or merely awakened something ancient, vengeful, and insatiable? The soul's great experiment hurtled precipitously toward catastrophe, chains rattling like the knell of doom. Chapter 4. Scandal and Oblivion. Fairfax Hall, once a bastion of Enlightenment ambition perched imperiously atop the thawing Yorkshire moors, now trembled under the onslaught of spring 1726, as meltwaters swelled the River Derwent into a raging torrent that mirrored the rising tide of outrage surging beyond the manor's fortified walls. April rains had transformed the surrounding landscape into a quagmire of mud-churned tracks and overflowing ditches, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and burgeoning decay, while buds strained against their woody prisons on hawthorn hedges, nature's indifferent renewal clashing with the human tragedy festering within. Mary's wrist slashes, self-inflicted in her solstice eve despair, had festered into a gangrenous horror that spread like black veins snaking inexorably up her emaciated arms, her fevered delirium birthing ceaseless moor howls that seeped through the cellar's unyielding stone to haunt the fractured sleep of villagers in Whitby Edge. These nocturnal wails, raw and piercing as a banshee's lament, blended with Peter's hollow rasps of "sis, free," a fraternal mantra echoing cell to cell like a dirge for the lost, his shoulder wrenched grotesquely from its socket during his futile battering of the bars, leaving him slumped in listless refusal of the slop shoveled through his grate. Dr. Elias Thorne's leeches, applied in frantic clusters, proved impotent against the rot. Reverend Josiah Hale's prayers curdled into wild accusations of witchcraft, levelled not just at the twins, but at the experimenters themselves. His red face twisted in paranoid fury as he clutched his Bible like a shield. Lady Margaret Fairfax, her once soft features gaunt from endless sleepless vigils at the girl's bedside, smuggled raw scraps of mutton and bread crusts past Thorne's faltering watch, whispering hoarsely through the bars, "Hold on, my wildings. Exposure comes, and justice with it," her voice a threadbare lifeline amid the encroaching abyss. The scandal ignited like dry tinder flung into a peat fire, spreading with the unstoppable fury of gossip fueled by alehouse whispers and broadside hawkers. A scullery maid, one Eliza Croft, pale and trembling after months of cellar horrors, had fled the manor's dread clutches under cover of a starless night, bursting into the crowded taproom of the Black Bull in Whitby Edge with tales that silenced the din. Demons in the cellars, blood walls painted by their own claws, twins eating rats and whispering to shadows, calling kin from the moors. Her words, laced with the conviction of witnessed nightmares, rippled outward like stones cast into a stagnant pond. By dawn, pamphlets multiplied overnight like vermin in the straw, crudely printed on rag paper, hawked by broadside boys from York to London streets. The moorland changelings, Fairfax's hellish forge unveiled. Illustrated with woodcuts of snarling beast children chained in vaults, these screeds detailed satanic experiments and souls flayed by rationalist knives, selling for a penny each to horrified readers who passed them hand to hand in markets and churches. Crowds massed at Fairfax Hall's wrought-iron gates by midday, a seething throng of crofters wielding pitchforks rusted from disuse, fishermen with gutting knives at their belts, mothers clutching rosaries and squalling infants to their bosoms, all united in a primal demand. "Burn the beast babes, cleanse the land of their curse." Torches flared against the April chill, sputtering in the damp as chants swelled into a roaring cadence. "Exorcise! Exterminate!" drowning out Lord Fairfax's desperate pleas from the battlements above. Inside the manor, chaos reigned supreme. Thorne barricaded the cellar stairwell with splintered crates and ale barrels, his lancet trembling in a fist gone white-knuckled. Hale fled precipitously to the chapel wing, barricading himself behind altar rails and abandoning his self-proclaimed demons to their fate, his sermons now self-serving cries for divine protection. Thomas Hargrove, the gamekeeper whose conscience had clawed at him since that fog-shrouded dawn in the Yew Hollow, seized the tumult as his final act of redemption. Slipping into the cellars amid the din, he loosed the twins' chains with a knife pried from his boot, rasping urgently, "Run while ye can, poor devils, back to the moors what birthed ye." But Mary's sepsis had chained her more surely than iron. She lay in fevered delirium, skin hot as forge coals, murmuring of endless forests. Peter cradled her frail form against his chest, rocking with guttural lullabies half remembered from their wild cradle. His human words eroded back to primal keens that vibrated through the stone. Fairfax himself faced the horde from the manor's crenellated battlements, his powdered wig askew and voice booming with the authority of his station. "These are children of God, reclaimed by the light of science from savagery's pit. Begone, ye superstitious curs. Reason shall prevail over your mobbish fears." His words rang hollow against the fury below. A hurled cobble from the crowd split his brow open, blood streaming crimson down his lace cravat as he staggered back, clutching the stone. At that precarious moment, constables dispatched from York assizes galloped into the fray on lathered mounts, whips cracking like thunder to scatter the mob, truncheons felling the most fervent rioters amid screams and scuffles. Yet even as order teetered, Mary's final scream pierced the din, not one of lingering pain, but of profound release, as the gangrenous fever claimed her at dawn's first pallid light, her porcelain-pale face slackening into eternal stillness, the strawberry birthmarks stark against the death pallor like a final accusation. Peter discovered her cold form moments later, his dislocated arm dragging uselessly as he crawled to her pallet. Grief did not erupt in wails, but in a profound, chilling silence. His eyes, once flickering with cunning and fury, hardened from raw sorrow into an emotionless void, pupils dilating like black moons. Then, methodically, almost ritually, he smeared her congealing blood across the cell walls in cryptic symbols only he could decipher. Moor runes framing her pallet like a wild grave shroud, handprints splayed in supplication, claw trails evoking the yew tree's scarred bark, a testament to their shared wild soul, now sundered forever. Authorities stormed the manor at midday under warrant, booted feet thundering down the spiral stairwell into the reeking cellars. Mary's corpse, bloated and reeking of rot with maggots already tracing her wounds, fueled immediate indictments. Fairfax arrested on charges of murder by experiment, his empiricist journals seized as damning evidence. Thorne clapped in irons for barbarous physic, his phrenological ledgers confiscated amid jeers. Hale had fled north to Scotland under cover of night, disgraced and excommunicated in absentia. Peter, in the pandemonium of the raid, chains fully unbound by Hargrove's earlier mercy, vanished like moor mist into the thawing wilderness, slipping past distracted guards through a forgotten grate, half choked with roots. Searchers combed the woods for weeks. Packs of hounds tracked his bloody footprints to the Derwent's swirling edge, noses flaring at the scent, only to lose it abruptly amid the current's roar. Nothing but echoes remained. Villagers whispered fervently that he had rejoined his wolfkin under moonlit skies, or dissolved into the mist itself, a revenant born of the enclosure's ancient sins, forever haunting the land that birthed him. Trials scorched the pages of London gazettes from York assizes to the Old Bailey, transforming the scandal into national spectacle. Fairfax, shackled in the dock with his finery stripped to prison rags, defended himself with empiricist eloquence. Nurture's limits were tested rigorously, not souls tortured wantonly. Progress demands such sacrifices. Pamphleteers savaged him mercilessly. Lord Savagemaker, Enlightenment's bloody quill. Convicted of manslaughter amid public baying, he languished in Newgate's fever ward, expiring in squalor as jail fever ravished his frame, his precious journals consigned to flames by a shamed kin, desperate to erase the family stain. Thorne swung from York Castle's gallows for criminal negligence, his pseudoscientific tomes publicly pulped into papier-mâché by jeering crowds. Lady Margaret vanished into the cloistered silence of a remote convent in Durham, her final letter to a distant cousin, a plea etched in trembling script. Let the Moors keep their secrets buried deep. Some lights blind more surely than darkness. Peter's fate lingered as the saga's most tantalizing enigma, sightings flickering through Yorkshire folklore for years, like will-o'-the-wisps. A 1730 broadside from Scarborough claimed his recapture. Wild boy snared anew, more savage than before. But official parish records ended abruptly, as if redacted by fearful hands. Officialdom buried the affair with methodical efficiency. Fairfax lands seized by Crown Commissioners, cellars filled with quicklime to purge the stench of scandal, the manor itself razed by a mysterious fire in 1742. arson whispered among locals, torches lit by those who remembered the howls. Enlightenment chroniclers of the Royal Society omitted it entirely from their annals, fearing a blemish on reason's dawning triumph, expunging the tale lest it undermine the era's rationalist creed. Yet whispers endured stubbornly around Yorkshire peat fires in crofters' cottages, handed down like sacred curses, the twins as harbingers of ambition's folly, dire warnings that some souls, forged in wilderness's crucible, defy taming by chain or lancet, their wild essence anathema to civilized stone. Had science glimpsed the true abyss of nature's untamed core, or forged it anew in blood and hubris? The moors held their silence, vast and unyielding, but on fog-veiled dawns when mist cloaked the Derwent groves, a lone howl would ride the wind, Peter's unbroken vow, eternal and defiant, echoing across the heather. Freedom had not been granted by merciful hands, it was retaken in rivers of blood and shadows reclaimed, a feral requiem for the Enlightenment's overreach. What price the march of progress, when wild hearts refuse every proffered chain, turning reason's light to illuminating ash? The shadows of Yorkshire had swallowed their truth whole, but in memory they lingered, feral, free, and forever untamed.